The wind came first, a low, distant moan that rolled across the flatlands like a wounded beast. Then came the sand, thick and blinding, sweeping through the Arizona desert with the force of a curse. The sun vanished behind a swirling veil of dust, turning the sky the color of rust. Every man, beast, and wagon in the territory sought shelter, but one figure remained out there, battling the storm: Cole Maddox, the rancher of Dry Creek. Cole had seen storms before. He'd seen worse things, too, things a man didn't talk about. The Civil War had carved deep scars into him, not just on his body, but in the way he carried himself. Slow, deliberate, as if he weighed every breath before taking it. Since the war's end, he'd built a life of quiet isolation on his ranch, tending cattle and fixing fences, trying to forget the screams and fire of battlefields long gone. But that afternoon, as the sky darkened and his horses panicked in their pens, he felt the old dread return, the kind that made the heart thump against the ribs like a hammer. He fought through the choking wind to secure the barn doors, shouting over the roar of the storm. The cattle bellowed, hooves striking the ground in fear. Sand whipped at his face, cutting like tiny blades. Just as he was about to retreat into the safety of his cabin, something strange pierced the chaos. A faint, distant cry. It was nearly drowned by the wind, but Cole heard it again. Not the cry of a cow or calf. It was sharper, desperate, human. He hesitated only a moment. Logic told him to ignore it. No man had any business being out there now. But Cole had lived too long with the burden of ignoring cries for help. He grabbed his oilskin coat, mounted his horse, and rode into the storm. The desert was an ocean of dust, shifting and swirling until every landmark disappeared. Cole leaned low over his saddle, guiding his horse by instinct more than sight. The cry came again, closer this time. He turned toward it, his heart pounding harder with each step. Then he saw something, a shape half buried in the sand, struggling weakly. He jumped off his horse and knelt beside the figure. It was a woman, her clothes torn, her skin pale beneath the dust. Her lips moved, but her words were faint, broken by exhaustion and the wind. Cole brushed the sand from her face. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and frightened. She was barely conscious, her body trembling with cold despite the heat of the desert. "Easy," he murmured, his voice low but steady. "You're safe now." She tried to speak again, but all that came out was a hoarse whisper. Cole wrapped his coat around her and lifted her gently into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, like a ghost-given form. He carried her to his horse and mounted carefully, shielding her from the worst of the wind as he rode back toward the ranch. The journey back felt endless. Twice, he nearly lost his bearings, relying only on the faint outline of his windmill to guide him home. When he finally reached the cabin, he laid her on his bed, lit the stove, and covered her with blankets. For hours he sat nearby, watching the flicker of firelight dance across her face, wondering who she was and what had brought her into such peril. Outside, the storm howled on, fierce and relentless. But inside the small wooden cabin, time seemed to stand still. Cole didn't know it yet, but that night would mark the beginning of something that would test every conviction he had left. The storm outside was just weather. The one that had arrived on his doorstep was fate. And as lightning split the sky over Dry Creek, the rancher whispered to himself, "What in God's name have I just brought home?" By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so heavy it pressed against the walls of the cabin. Dust lay thick over everything, the porch, the fences, the troughs, as though the desert itself had tried to swallow the ranch whole. Inside, Cole Maddox stirred the embers of the fire back to life and turned toward the woman he'd pulled from the sand the night before. She lay motionless beneath a wool blanket, her breathing shallow but steady. Her hair, dark and tangled, spilled over the pillow like strands of ink. Her face bore small cuts from the storm, her lips dry and cracked. Cole had tended to her as best he could, cleaned the wounds, given her water, and kept her warm. He'd done it all by instinct, the same way he'd once tended to wounded soldiers on the battlefield. Only now, instead of the cries of dying men, there was only the whisper of the wind outside. When she finally stirred, Her eyes opened slowly, blinking against the dim light. They were dark, deep, and wary, the eyes of someone who had seen too much suffering to trust easily. Cole rose from his chair, slow and deliberate so as not to startle her. "You're safe," he said quietly. "Storm's over." She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a rasp. Her accent was heavy, Apache perhaps, or Mexican, he couldn't be sure. She managed a few broken words, her English uncertain. "Where, this?" "Dry Creek," Cole replied. "My ranch." She looked around, confusion shadowing her face. When she tried to sit up, she winced and clutched her side in pain. Cole stepped closer but stopped short, sensing her fear. "Don't move too quick." "You're hurt," he said. "You were out there in the storm?" "Nearly buried alive." She looked down at her wrists, still raw from the bindings he'd found. The marks told a story she didn't need to explain. Cole felt something twist inside him. Anger, pity, something deeper he couldn't name. "What's your name?" he asked softly. For a moment she didn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Ilara." Cole nodded slowly. "Ilara. All right." She studied him as if trying to decide whether he was friend or foe. There was something in her eyes, not just fear, but defiance, as if she had spent too long surviving on distrust to ever let it go. Cole understood that look. He'd worn it himself once after the war. He poured her a tin cup of water and handed it over. She hesitated, then took it with trembling hands. The way she drank, cautious, controlled, told him she was used to scarcity. When she finished, she whispered, "Thank you." Cole gave a faint nod. "You got family somewhere? Someone I can send word to?" Ilara's gaze dropped to the floor. She shook her head slowly. "No family. No home." Her voice carried a finality that made Cole's chest tighten. He wanted to ask more, to understand how she'd ended up alone in the middle of the desert, but the exhaustion in her face told him it wasn't the time. Instead, he stepped outside to gather himself. The morning sun was harsh against the dust-covered plains, turning everything a pale gold. The ranch was still standing, but just barely. Half the fences had been torn down by the wind, and one of the barns had collapsed. Yet for some reason his mind wasn't on the damage. It was on the woman inside his cabin, the stranger who had survived where no one should have. When he returned, she was asleep again, her breathing even, her face peaceful for the first time. Cole stood at the doorway, hat in hand, watching her as if trying to solve a riddle written in another language. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or why fate had dragged her into his life, only that the desert had spared her for a reason. And as he watched the faint rise and fall of her chest, a thought crossed his mind that unsettled him deeply. In saving her, he might have just invited trouble far greater than any storm. The sun rose high over Dry Creek by the third morning, burning away the last traces of the storm. The desert was still and brittle again, as though the land had never known chaos. But inside the walls of Cole Maddox's cabin, tension brewed quietly, the kind that comes not from weather, but from the uneasy weight of secrets. Ilara was recovering faster than Cole expected. She could sit up now, even move about the cabin, though she avoided the windows and flinched at the sound of horses outside. Cole didn't ask questions, not yet. He told himself he was giving her time to heal, but the truth was he didn't know what to ask, or whether he wanted the answers. That morning, Cole was out mending a broken fence when he heard hooves approaching, steady, heavy, and familiar. He looked up to see Sheriff Briggs riding toward the ranch, his tan duster trailing dust in his wake. The man was thick-shouldered, clean-shaven, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Briggs wasn't a bad lawman, but he was a practical one, and Cole knew that meant trouble. "Morning, Maddox," Briggs called, reining in his horse by the fence. "Heard you had yourself a bit of excitement during the storm." Cole didn't look up from his work. "Storm blew through. Lost a few fence posts. Nothing more. That so?" Briggs asked, dismounting. He took a slow look around, his eyes scanning the property, the freshly patched windows, the tracks near the barn, and the faint signs of another pair of boots around the porch. "Funny thing, though. Folks in town said they saw you ride out into the storm. Any reason for that? Cole's hand stilled. Heard something. Thought it was one of my cattle. Wasn't? Briggs tilted his head. Wasn't cattle? Cole finally met his eyes. Was a person, a woman. Found her half dead out there. That caught the sheriff's full attention. A woman? Name's Alara, Cole said, his tone flat. She's in no shape to talk much. Been hurt. I'm letting her rest. Briggs crossed his arms. You sure that's a good idea? You don't know who she is, where she's from. Could be one of them drifters from across the border. Could be tied up with the Apache raids we've been hearing about. Cole's jaw tightened. Doesn't matter who she is. She was dying. I wasn't about to leave her. The sheriff gave a small, humorless chuckle. Always knew you had more heart than sense, Maddox. But let me tell you plain. We've had 3 wagons robbed this month. 2 settlers shot dead. Whoever's behind it ain't far from here. So if this woman's mixed up in it, you best let me handle it. Cole shook his head. She's staying. Until she can stand on her own 2 feet, Briggs stepped closer, his voice lowering. You think you're doing her a favor, but you might just be putting a target on your back. These desert folk, they don't forget debts or secrets. You take in one of their own, they'll come to collect. Cole didn't flinch. If they come, I'll be here. For a long moment, the sheriff studied him, the same way a man might study a rattlesnake, not sure if it would strike. Then Briggs nodded once and turned to mount his horse. Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you. If trouble comes knocking, it won't just be your land they burn. As the sheriff rode off, Cole watched the trail of dust fade into the horizon. He knew Briggs was right about one thing. Trouble had a way of finding the weak spots in a man's life. And he had just created one. When he returned inside, Ilara was sitting by the window, her dark eyes fixed on the sheriff's retreating figure. She didn't ask who he was. She already knew by the look in Cole's face. He knows, she said softly, her accent thicker when she was afraid. Cole paused, his hand on the doorframe. Knows what? That I'm not supposed to be here. Something cold ran down his spine. He wanted to demand an explanation, but the fear in her voice stopped him. Instead, he said, Then we'll make sure no one else finds out. Outside, the desert lay quiet again, but the peace was an illusion. Sheriff Briggs's warning echoed in Cole's mind long after he was gone. And deep down, the rancher knew that whatever secrets Ilara carried, they were heavy enough to bring a war straight to his doorstep. The following days passed in uneasy calm. The storm was gone, but its memory lingered, in the splintered barn, the sagging fences, and in Ilara's haunted eyes. Cole Maddox worked the ranch from dawn till dusk, but no amount of mending or hammering could drown out the silence between them. Every night, when the desert wind sighed through the cracks in the cabin walls, Cole wondered who she really was, and what kind of hell she had escaped. Ilara spoke little at first. Her English came in broken pieces, and when Cole asked where she'd come from, her eyes would drop to the floor as though the question itself was too heavy to lift. But over time, fragments began to surface. Small, fragile things, like shards of a broken mirror reflecting her hidden life. One evening, while Cole sat by the fire sharpening his knife, Ilara watched the sparks drift upward from the hearth. Her voice, soft and trembling, broke the quiet. Before, I lived by the river. Far south. Traders came, soldiers too. They said they needed help. Someone to speak. Both tongues, Cole looked up. Both tongues? She nodded slowly. Apache and English. My mother taught me when I was small. The soldiers, they paid for my words. Her face tightened with old pain. But they lied. They always lie. Cole listened, saying nothing. He'd learned long ago that silence could draw more truth than questions ever could. Ilara went on, her voice gaining strength. They took me north, said I would help make peace with the tribes. But when the fighting started, they blamed me, said I told the Apaches where the supplies were. Said I was a spy, she gave a bitter laugh, short, hollow. I was only trying to live. Cole set down his knife. And what happened then? Her eyes glistened in the firelight. They sold me. To men with no flag, no law. Outlaws who traded guns for gold and women for silence. I escaped. When the storm came, That's when you found me, Cole's stomach turned. The idea of soldiers, men in uniform, selling a woman like her cut deep into something raw inside him. He'd seen corruption in war, but hearing it spoken aloud by someone so broken and yet so strong made his blood run cold. "Do they know you're alive?" he asked. Alara shook her head. "They think I'm dead, but they will come when they learn I'm not. Men like them, they do not lose what they think belongs to them." Her words settled heavily in the cabin. Outside, the coyotes began their distant howls, as if echoing the truth of her warning. Cole stood and paced to the window. The desert stretched endless and empty, but he knew appearances lied out here. Somewhere beyond those distant ridges, men were searching, not for cattle, not for land, but for her. "You don't owe me answers," he said finally, his voice rough. "But if you stay here, you do need to be honest. So I know what I'm protecting you from." Ilara's gaze met his. "You are not protecting me," she said quietly. "You are protecting yourself from being alone." The words hit him harder than he expected. For a moment he had no answer, and because somewhere in them there was truth. He turned away, embarrassed, and went back to his work, but the thought lingered. Maybe saving her had been as much about saving himself. That night, sleep did not come easily. Cole sat by the window with his rifle across his lap, watching the horizon for any sign of movement. Each flicker of shadow, each whisper of wind made his pulse quicken. He knew now what kind of men were out there, and that if they ever came for her, they would not ask nicely. When dawn crept over the hills, painting the desert in shades of gold, Ilara stepped quietly beside him. "You should sleep," she said softly. He shook his head. "Can't. Not yet." She hesitated, then placed her hand over his, a small, trembling gesture that felt more like trust than comfort. "They will come," she whispered, her eyes steady now. "But this time, I won't run." Cole looked at her, and in that moment he saw not a broken woman but a survivor, one who had endured what most men couldn't imagine. And for the first time since the storm, he realized something terrifying. Whatever came next, he was already in too deep to turn back. The peace that had settled over Dry Creek Ranch after the storm was fragile, like the surface of still water hiding a current beneath. For a few short days, Cole Maddox and Ilara fell into an uneasy rhythm. She helped around the cabin, mending clothes, grinding cornmeal, and tending to the animals with quiet diligence. Cole, in turn, rebuilt his fences and fixed the barn, telling himself that life was returning to normal. But in the desert, peace was never permanent. It was a borrowed thing, and the debt always came due. It was near midnight when Cole first heard the horses. He'd been sitting by the fire, cleaning his revolver, when the faint sound of hooves reached him, not one set, but several. His hand froze mid-motion. He knew the rhythm of his own herd, the plodding pace of a neighbor's wagon. This wasn't either. These riders were fast, deliberate, and closing in. Without a word, he blew out the lamp and crossed the room in 2 strides. "Ilara," he whispered sharply. She stirred from the corner, instantly alert. "What is it?" "Horses. 4, maybe 5. Heading this way." Her face went pale. She didn't ask who it might be. She already knew. Cole pulled his Winchester from above the door and nodded toward the trap door in the corner of the floor. "Down there, go." "No," she said, shaking her head. "If it's them, they'll kill you." He gave her a hard look. "And if you stay, they'll take you." "You want that?" For a heartbeat, her defiance flared, but then the fear behind her eyes won. She crouched down and slipped into the narrow cellar beneath the cabin, clutching the blanket he handed her. As he lowered the door, she whispered, "Don't let them find me, Cole." "I won't." Then he turned and waited. The riders arrived in a storm of dust and hoofbeats, their torches flickering in the dark. Cole counted 6 of them now, their silhouettes moving like ghosts across the yard. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, dismounted and called out, his voice rough with arrogance. "Maddox! We don't want trouble. Just looking for what's ours." Cole stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, the moonlight catching the hard edge of his expression. "Ain't got nothing of yours here." The man laughed, low and cold. "That's so? Word is you dragged a woman out of the storm last week. She don't belong to you, rancher. Best hand her over before someone gets hurt. Cole didn't move. You're trespassing. Turn around and ride back the way you came. The outlaw's grin vanished. You got no idea who you're talking to, old man. That woman's marked. She stole from us. Gold government pay, worth more than your whole damn ranch. So I'll say it once more. Bring her out. Cole's finger tightened on the trigger. You want her, you come take her. The standoff lasted only a breath. Then the night exploded. Gunfire tore through the still air, the muzzle flashes lighting up the yard. Cole dove behind a wagon, firing back in measured bursts. Splinters flew as bullets chewed through the porch beams. His horse screamed and broke loose from its post, galloping into the dark. The fight lasted minutes that felt like hours. Cole's aim was steady, his every shot deliberate. 2 of the riders went down. The others, realizing they'd kicked a hornet's nest, cursed and pulled back, dragging their wounded. Before riding off, the tall one shouted into the night, "You can't hide her forever! We'll be back, and we'll burn this place to the ground." Then they vanished into the desert. Cole stood in the silence that followed, chest heaving, smoke rising from the barrel of his rifle. He waited until he was sure they were gone, then opened the cellar door. Alara climbed out, her face pale, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "You could have died," she whispered. "Wouldn't be the first time," he muttered, checking the window. She stepped closer, her voice shaking. "They'll come again, I know. Then why help me?" she asked, almost pleading. "You owe me nothing." Cole looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, there was no distance in his eyes. "Maybe not," he said quietly. "But I'll be damned if I let men like that take what they want again." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of smoke and blood. Cole knew this was only the beginning. The outlaws would return, stronger, angrier, and with more guns. And when they did, he'd be ready. For 2 nights after the gunfight, Dry Creek Ranch lay in uneasy silence. The desert, usually calm after dusk, seemed to hold its breath. Every creak of the windmill, every rustle of brush outside made Cole Maddox's hand twitch toward his rifle. He'd faced worse in his life, ambushes, raids, and war, but this felt different. This time it wasn't just his life on the line. It was Alara's, and for reasons he didn't yet understand, that fact cut deeper than any wound he'd ever taken. Alara barely spoke after the attack. She spent most of her hours near the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the horizon as though expecting the outlaws to ride back at any moment. When Cole tried to talk to her, she gave only short answers, her voice distant. It wasn't just fear he saw in her, it was guilt. On the 3rd morning, Cole set down his coffee tin and said, "You've barely slept. If we're going to fight what's coming, you need rest." Her eyes flicked toward him, sharp and haunted. "You shouldn't fight for me," he frowned. "You keep saying that, but I already did." "I didn't ask you to." "No," he said, his tone steady. "But you needed it." Ilara's hands clenched around the blanket. "You don't understand, Cole. They don't stop. The men you fought, they don't forget. If they can't find me, they'll burn everything you love. You should have let me go when I asked." Cole leaned back, his jaw tightening. "And let you die out there? That's not how I was raised." Her voice broke, desperate now. "It's not mercy to keep me here. It's death for both of us." Those words hit him harder than any bullet could. For a moment, the rancher's calm cracked, revealing the storm beneath. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the desert where smoke still lingered from the burnt fence posts. "You think I'm doing this just to save you?" "Hell, Alara, I don't even know why I'm doing it anymore." She rose from her seat and stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the wood floor. "Then why, Cole?" He turned to face her. The firelight painted her face in shades of gold and shadow. "Because I'm tired of watching the world take from people who never had a chance to fight back. I've seen too much of that already." Her expression softened, and for the first time, he saw something new in her eyes. Not fear, but understanding. She took a trembling breath and whispered, "You'll die for me, won't you?" "Maybe," he said, his voice low. "But I'd rather die doing something that feels right than live another day running from what's wrong." A tear slipped down her cheek. She reached for his arm, her fingers cold but sure. "Please," she said, voice breaking. "Then hurry. If you mean to help me live, not just hide." That plea hung between them, fragile and raw. In that moment, Cole realized she wasn't begging for safety. She was begging for courage, for him to act, to choose a side once and for all, so that day he did. Cole rode into town for the first time since the storm. The streets were dusty and half-empty, but whispers followed him wherever he went. Word of the gunfight had spread. At the general store, old men fell silent as he passed. When he reached the blacksmith's, Sheriff Briggs was waiting for him. The sheriff leaned against a post, chewing on a toothpick. "You look like a man building a gallows for himself," Briggs drawled. "You should have listened when I told you to turn her in." Cole's reply was sharp. "She's got a name, Briggs, and I ain't handing her over to a pack of butchers." Briggs spat into the dirt. "You keep talking like that, you'll find the law ain't the only thing you'll have to worry about." "You think you're saving her? You're just making yourself a target." Cole stepped close, his voice low. "Then let them come." The sheriff studied him, eyes narrowing. "You really think you can stand alone against all that?" "I've been alone most of my life," Cole said. "Ain't much different." When he rode back to the ranch that evening, the sun was setting over the ridge, bleeding red across the desert. Ilara waited by the corral, her face lit by the fading light. She didn't ask what he'd done, and he didn't tell her. They didn't need words. As darkness fell, Cole felt the weight of his decision settle on him like the night air. Heavy, unrelenting, but right. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from the ghosts of his past. He was facing them head-on, and as he looked toward the horizon, he knew one thing for certain. Between mercy and fear, he'd made his choice. A morning sun rose weakly over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. The aftermath of the ambush still lingered. A trail of boot prints, shattered wagon wheels, and the faint smell of gunpowder drifting through the sagebrush. Cole Maddox leaned on his rifle, exhaustion etched deep into his weathered face. Every muscle in his body ached, but his mind was sharper than ever. Behind him, Ilara tended to the horses, her movements quiet and deliberate. She hadn't said much since the night before, when she had begged him to hurry, to save her, even if it meant doing the unthinkable. The memory still gnawed at him. He had pulled her from the brink of death, but the way she had looked at him, terrified, pleading, wouldn't leave his thoughts. As the wind picked up, blowing dust across the plain, Cole finally spoke. "You ain't told me much about where you came from," he said. His tone was calm, but there was a tension beneath it. "Or why those men were after you." Ilara froze for a moment, then straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "I already told you. They were bounty men, hired by a man named Cutter." Cole's eyes narrowed. "Yeah, I remember. But what I don't get is why. Cutter don't send his dogs after folks unless there's good money in it. What did you do to him?" She hesitated, looking toward the distant mountains. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I didn't do anything to him, but my father did." Cole frowned. "Your father?" Ilara nodded slowly. "He used to work for Cutter, managing his cattle drives, until he found out Cutter was using the drives to move stolen rifles. My father threatened to turn him in." She swallowed hard. "Cutter made sure he never got the chance. He burned our home, killed my family. I barely escaped." For a long moment, Cole said nothing. The wind howled between them, carrying the scent of dust and wild sage. Finally, he muttered, "So you've been running ever since?" Ilara nodded again. "He wants to finish what he started." Cole kicked at the dirt. "Hell of a thing running from a man like Cutter. He owns half the law in this territory." "I know." Her eyes met his, sharp, desperate, unyielding. "That's why I came this far west. I thought maybe the desert could hide me." He gave a grim chuckle. "The desert don't hide nobody. It just makes you harder to find for a while." For the first time since the ambush, Ilara's lips curved into a faint smile. "You talk like a man who knows what it's like to be hunted." Cole's expression darkened. "Maybe I do." He turned away, his gaze fixed on the barren horizon. The truth was, he did know. Years ago, he'd worn a badge. until a deal gone wrong cost him his brother's life. The same lawmen who had sworn loyalty to him turned their backs. Since then, he'd been living out here, somewhere between guilt and redemption. "Cole," Alara said softly, stepping closer. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared out into the endless stretch of desert until finally, he said, "Maybe I'm tired of burying folks who don't deserve it. Maybe I see something in you worth saving." She looked at him, searching his face for a trace of deceit. There was none, only a deep, silent pain she didn't yet understand. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint sound, the distant thunder of horses. Cole stiffened instantly. "Riders," he muttered. "We need to move." Ilara's hand went to her revolver, though her fingers trembled. "How many?" "Too many to count from here." He scanned the ridge, eyes narrowing. "They found our trail faster than I figured." They mounted quickly, the horses restless beneath them. As they rode hard toward the canyons, the ground shook under their hooves. The riders behind them, Cutter's men, were closing in fast. By the time they reached the jagged cliffs of Red Mesa Canyon, Cole could feel the trap closing around them. He pulled the reins, stopping at the edge of a rocky overlook. "There's a way through," he said, pointing to a narrow pass below. "But it's tight, and they'll follow." Ilara looked at him, fear and defiance mingling in her eyes. "Then what do we do?" Cole reloaded his rifle and met her gaze. "We make our stand. But not here, not yet. There's something in that canyon I buried a long time ago, something that might just turn the tide." As they descended into the shadow of the canyon, Ilara felt the first stirrings of hope. Whatever Cole had buried there, be it a weapon, a secret, or a piece of his soul, it might be their only chance to survive. The desert around them grew darker, the air thicker. The sound of approaching hooves echoed through the canyon walls like thunder. And in that haunting silence, both of them knew, the past was catching up, for both the hunted and the haunted. The night before dawn was eerily still. The stars, usually bright over the Dry Creek Valley, hid behind a blanket of low clouds, as though the heavens themselves refused to watch what was coming. Inside the ranch house, Cole Maddox sat by the dying fire, his rifle across his knees, waiting for the sound he knew would come. Hooves. Ilara lay in the next room, wrapped in a quilt, but she wasn't sleeping either. Her breathing was uneven, shallow, as if each breath carried the weight of dread. She had told Cole everything the night before, the truth about the Black Vultures, the outlaw band led by Jeb Craven, the man who had once called himself her husband. She had escaped him after witnessing him murder a lawman in cold blood, and now Jeb wanted her silenced. The storm that had brought her to Cole's land had not been chance. Craven's men had been on her trail for days, and by sunrise, they would find the ranch. Cole rose, adjusting his hat and checking the rifle's chamber. He walked to the window, eyes sweeping over the ridgeline. "They'll come from the east," he muttered. Ilara appeared at the doorway, her face pale in the lamplight. "Then we should go." "There's still time." He shook his head. "You run, they'll follow. You stay, I can make a stand." Her voice trembled. "You'll die, Cole." "Maybe, but not before I take some of them with me." She stepped forward, gripping his arm. "You don't owe me this." He met her gaze, steady, unflinching. "Don't I? You showed me something worth fighting for again. That's more than anyone's done in a long time." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, quietly, Ilara said, "If they kill you, I'll never forgive myself." Cole gave her a faint smile. "Then make sure they don't." Before dawn, the ranch transformed into a fortress. Cole stacked barrels by the corral, loaded spare rifles in the barn loft, and set lanterns along the fences to cast moving shadows, a trick to make it look like he had men stationed around. Ilara helped where she could, fetching ammunition and pouring lamp oil, her hands trembling but determined. When the first glimmer of light touched the eastern hills, the sound came, the rumble of hooves, the shrill neighing of horses and the faint echo of men shouting. Cole's jaw clenched. He took his position behind the stone wall near the porch and raised his rifle. "They're here," Ilara whispered. "Stay inside," he ordered. "No matter what." Jeb Craven's voice tore through the morning air like a blade. "Cole Maddox! You've got something that belongs to me!" Cole didn't answer. He could see them now. 6 riders cresting the ridge, black dust trailing behind them. Craven rode in the center, a scar slashing across his jaw, his eyes full of venom. "I'll give you one chance," Craven shouted. "Send her out, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to regret it." Cole exhaled slowly, sighting down his rifle. "You had your chance," he whispered, and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the still air. Craven's right-hand man fell from his saddle before the others could even draw their guns. Chaos erupted. The outlaws scattered, firing wildly toward the house. Bullets tore through wood and glass, but Cole stayed steady, reloading, firing, and moving between cover. Inside, Ilara could hear the storm of gunfire, each shot a heartbeat in her chest. Against Cole's orders, she grabbed a revolver and crept toward the door. When one of the outlaws tried to circle around to the barn, she fired, the recoil nearly throwing her back. And the man dropped. By mid-morning, smoke rose from the corral and the ranch was scarred with bullet holes and blood. Only 3 men remained on their horses, Craven and 2 others. Craven dismounted slowly, his face twisted with rage. "You think you're a hero, rancher? You don't even know what she is." Cole stepped from cover, gun still raised. "I don't care what she was. I know what she is now. Free." Craven laughed darkly. "Free? No one's free out here." Their eyes locked. The world seemed to narrow to just the 2 of them, one bound by cruelty, the other by conscience. Then, in the space of a breath, both fired. Craven's bullet tore through Cole's shoulder. Cole's shot hit true, straight through Craven's heart. The outlaw leader stumbled, eyes wide, before collapsing into the dust. His men fled, spurring their horses hard into the desert. When the last echo of hooves faded, Ilara ran from the house, dropping beside Cole. Blood seeped through his shirt, but he was breathing. She pressed her hands to the wound, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You did it," she whispered. "It's over," Cole gave a faint pained grin. "No, Ilara, it's just beginning." Because even as the sun rose red over the horizon, she could see what he meant. The ranch was half burned, the fence gone, the land soaked with blood. The fight was over, but survival had only just begun. The battle was over, but Dry Creek Ranch felt more like a graveyard than a victory. Smoke still drifted from the burned fence posts, mingling with the sharp scent of gunpowder and blood. The rising sun cast a pale light across the land, golden yet hollow, as if the world was pretending not to see the ruin left behind. Ilara worked with trembling hands to tend to Cole Maddox's wound. He sat slumped against the porch railing, his shirt dark with blood and dust. Every breath he drew came ragged, but his jaw remained set, eyes distant and steady. "Hold still," she whispered, pressing a cloth to his shoulder. He winced, managing a grim smile. That hurts less than Craven's face when he realized he'd lost. Her lips twitched in spite of the tears threatening to spill. "You shouldn't joke. You could have died." "Could have," he admitted. Didn't, but Ilara could see how close he was to the edge. The bullet had gone clean through, but the blood loss had weakened him. She wrapped his shoulder tightly and helped him inside, where the fire still flickered low. Cole looked around the cabin. Bullet holes in the walls, shattered glass on the floor, and a streak of blood across the doorframe. "Guess I'll be rebuilding for a while," he murmured. Ilara sank to her knees beside him. "You can't stay here. They'll send more. Craven's dead, but his men won't let that go. They'll come for revenge." He looked at her, his eyes soft but weary. "And where would you have me go? This is my land, my life." Her voice trembled. "Then you'll die for it." Cole didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire for a long time before saying quietly, "Maybe dying for something is better than running from everything?" The words hit her harder than gunfire. She wanted to argue, to scream at him for being stubborn, but deep down, she knew he meant it. Freedom for men like Cole had always come with a cost. That night, as Cole rested, Ilara stepped outside. The desert stretched endlessly, silent except for the distant cry of a coyote. The wind brushed her face like a whisper, cold and familiar. She thought of all the years she'd spent enslaved to fear, and how Cole's defiance had given her a kind of courage she never knew she had. But courage, she realized, demanded more than survival. It demanded sacrifice. At dawn, she packed a small satchel, water, bread, bullets, and left a note by Cole's bedside. Her handwriting was shaky but clear. "You saved me once. Now I have to save you. If I leave, they'll stop coming here. I can't let your home burn again because of me. Please don't follow." Ilara, when Cole woke, the bed beside him was empty. The door was open, the morning wind sweeping through. For a long moment, he just sat there, holding the note in his shaking hand. His throat tightened, not from the pain of his wound, but from the ache in his chest. "She's gone," he whispered. He tried to stand, and pain exploded through his shoulder. Still, he staggered to the door and looked out at the horizon. There were faint footprints leading toward the canyon road. "Damn it, Ilara," he growled under his breath. "You think you can run from this?" He strapped his rifle across his back, grimacing at the sting in his shoulder. The sun was rising fast now, painting the land in a harsh, unrelenting light. Each step he took was agony, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. He had promised her she wouldn't have to face her past alone, and he meant to keep that promise, even if it killed him. As he rode out, the ranch faded behind him, a wounded beast breathing smoke and silence. Ahead lay the open desert and the promise of vengeance. Ilara, meanwhile, rode toward the old mining trail, her eyes fixed ahead, but her heart breaking behind her. She told herself it was the right thing, that leaving Cole would keep him safe, but every mile made that lie harder to believe. The sun climbed higher, unforgiving. Sweat stung her eyes. She knew Craven's men were still out there, somewhere beyond the dunes, waiting for another chance. Freedom had come at a price, and now she understood what it truly cost: peace. There was no going back. Not for her. Not for Cole. And as both of them rode into separate horizons, the desert wind carried the same whisper of love, of loss, and of choices made too late. Because freedom, they would both learn soon, doesn't come when the chains are broken. It comes when you decide what you're willing to lose to keep it. The sun was merciless that day, turning the desert into a furnace of shimmering heat and silence. Cole Maddox rode through it like a ghost, one hand gripping the reins, the other pressed against his bandaged shoulder. Blood still seeped beneath the fabric, but he didn't care. The only thing that mattered now was finding Ilara before the Outlaws did. Her trail was faint, almost invisible in places, but Cole had been tracking cattle and bandits for years. He could read the desert like a map. The small hoof prints, the broken sagebrush, the faint scuff of boots in the dust, they all told a story. She was traveling light, fast, and alone, and from the looks of it, she hadn't stopped to rest. "Fool woman," he muttered under his breath, thinking she can outrun death. He followed the tracks south, past the dry creek beds and into the canyon pass, a place locals called Devil's Hollow, named for its steep walls and echoes that made men hear things that weren't there. The deeper he went, the darker it became, shadows crawling across the stone like living things. At one point, he stopped and dismounted, kneeling by a spot where the sand was disturbed. He touched the ground and found a few dark stains, blood. Not much, but enough. His stomach tightened. "Ilara!" he whispered. Meanwhile, a few miles ahead, Ilara was running out of strength. Her mare stumbled with each step, and her hands shook as she gripped the reins. The wound she'd taken during the last fight, a graze across her ribs, had reopened, and the pain was starting to blur her thoughts. But she couldn't stop. Not here, not when she could still feel the presence of men behind her, Craven's remaining outlaws who had regrouped after their leader's death. She'd overheard them in the hills at dusk, their voices hard and vengeful. They wanted her dead more than ever now to avenge their fallen boss, so she pushed on, even when her vision wavered and the canyon walls seemed to close in around her. As the night began to fall, the desert transformed. the air cooling, the sky burning red and purple. That was when Cole finally found signs of them. He spotted a half-burned campfire, boot tracks, and drag marks, signs of a struggle. His heart clenched. He followed the marks around a bend and froze. There, at the base of a cliff, was Ilara's horse, lathered in sweat and trembling, but alone. No rider. Cole dropped to the ground, checking the area. Then he saw it. A trail of footprints leading deeper into the canyon alongside heavier tracks. 4 men. He could see the pattern of their boots clearly in the soft dirt. "They took her," he whispered, his voice shaking with fury. He tightened the strap on his rifle and began to follow, silent and swift. Every step he took stirred memories of the past, ambushes, blood, and loss. But this time the stakes were different. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about Ilara, the woman who had unknowingly pulled him back from the brink of emptiness. When he finally caught sight of them, it was near a cluster of boulders where the canyon narrowed. The outlaws had made camp, 4 men, rough and lean, their laughter echoing off the walls. And tied to one of the rocks, her wrists bound, was Ilara. She was still conscious, her eyes defiant despite the bruises on her face. Cole crouched behind a rock, taking stock of the scene. He had 4 bullets in his rifle, a revolver with 3 more, and the element of surprise. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He waited until one of the men wandered off to relieve himself, then he struck, a shadow moving faster than the eye could follow. His first shot dropped the lookout. The others shouted, scrambling for cover. Ilara jerked upright, recognizing the sound. "Cole!" she cried. He moved through the chaos like lightning, firing, ducking, reloading. One man fell with a scream. Another tried to flank him, but Cole caught him with a hard blow to the jaw, sending him crashing into the rocks. The last outlaw lunged at Ilara, knife in hand. She twisted away, and before he could strike again, Cole's revolver barked. The man fell dead at her feet. When the echo of the final gunshot faded, the canyon was silent once more, save for Cole's ragged breathing. He stumbled toward her, dropping his rifle. "You never listen," he muttered. Ilara's tears fell freely as she reached for him. "You shouldn't have come." He smiled faintly, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. "Told you before, and I don't much like being told what to do." She laughed through her tears, and for the first time in days, the desert felt alive again, not with violence, but with the fragile warmth of survival. But as Cole glanced toward the ridge, he saw smoke rising, thin, black, and steady, not from the campfire. From the direction of Dry Creek Ranch, his blood ran cold. The outlaws they'd fought weren't the only ones. Something worse had come, and the real reckoning hadn't even begun. The faint black smoke that rose beyond the ridge struck Cole Maddox like a physical blow. He stood there, frozen for a heartbeat, his body still trembling from the fight. The desert wind carried the scent of burning wood and oil, the unmistakable smell of Dry Creek Ranch on fire. Ilara, still weak and bleeding, followed his gaze. "Cole," she whispered, her voice breaking. No, it can't be, but it was. Cole knew that kind of smoke. He'd seen it before, after raids, after battles, after men with nothing left to lose set fire to everything they couldn't control. Without a word, he grabbed his rifle, mounted the nearest horse, and extended his hand to Ilara. "Come on," she hesitated, fear flickering across her face. "You're hurt." "We both are," he cut her off, his tone hard. "Ain't got time for that." There was no arguing with him now. She climbed onto the horse behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist, and together they rode toward the horizon, toward the smoke, the danger, and whatever waited for them back home. The ride was brutal. The desert stretched endlessly, the sun beginning to fall behind them, turning the sky red and gold. Every jolt sent pain lancing through Cole's shoulder, but he didn't slow. Each mile only deepened the dread in his gut. As they neared the ranch, the fire's glow grew brighter. The fences were gone, the barn engulfed in flames, the roof of the cabin collapsing in on itself. The crackle of burning timber filled the air, and Cole could hear the faint, ghostly cries of dying animals in the corral. Ilara buried her face against his back, sobbing. No. Cole slid off the horse, stumbling toward what had once been his home. He felt the heat on his skin, the smoke burning his lungs, but he kept going. In the ruins of the porch, he found his rifle rack, warped and blackened by fire. Nearby lay the metal box where he kept his father's revolver. Melted, useless. This was all I had, he said hoarsely. All I ever built. Ilara stepped beside him, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. I'm so sorry, Cole. This is because of me. He turned to her sharply, eyes flashing. No, this is because of men like Craven. Men who think the world belongs to them. He looked back at the flames, jaw tightening. I should have known they wouldn't stop at killing us. They had to take the land, too. Ilara swallowed hard. Then we can't stay here. You need to leave, Cole. There's nothing left to fight for. He faced her fully now, his expression fierce and wounded all at once. You don't get it, do you? This land is my fight. Every inch of it was bought with sweat and blood. I ain't letting them win by walking away. She shook her head, stepping closer. And if you die here, what then? You think that's what your family would have wanted? To see you buried under the ashes? Her words cut deep. Cole looked away, the firelight dancing in his eyes. For a long moment, the only sound between them was the roar of the flames. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now. You sound just like her, Ilara blinked. Like who? My wife, he said softly. She died 5 years ago. Bandits. I tried to fight them off, same as now. She told me to run, said living was the only way to win. But I didn't listen. Ilara's breath caught. For the first time, she understood the full weight of his defiance. It wasn't just pride. It was guilt. A wound that had never healed. Cole, she whispered, touching his arm. You can still choose different this time. He looked at her, his face hardening again, but something in his eyes flickered. A spark of doubt, of longing. Different, he echoed. Maybe. Then, faintly, through the crackle of fire, came the sound of distant hooves, many of them. Cole's eyes narrowed. They're coming back, Ilara's heart skipped. Who? Craven's men, he said grimly, loading his revolver. The rest of them. The ones that weren't here before. He turned toward the blaze, the flames reflecting in his eyes like twin embers. This ain't just revenge now. It's war. Ilara grabbed his hand. Cole, please! But he pulled free and stepped forward, the fire painting him in gold and shadow. You said you wanted freedom, he said, his voice low. Freedom don't come from running. It comes from finishing what's been started. The wind shifted, carrying sparks toward the dry fields. In that instant, Cole knew what he had to do. Burn away the past, even if it consumed him with it. Ilara watched as he strode toward the barn's remains, gathering ammunition, his silhouette fierce against the inferno. She wanted to stop him, to make him see there was another way. But deep down, she knew. This was who he was. And as the fire roared higher into the night sky, the horizon itself seemed to bleed red, a promise of reckoning yet to come. The desert night was alive with flame and fury. The once peaceful Dry Creek Ranch now glowed like a beacon in the darkness, firelight dancing off the black hills. Cole Maddox stood at the edge of the smoldering corral, rifle in hand, his bloodied bandages half burned through. His face was streaked with ash, but his eyes, cold and steady, burned brighter than the fire itself. He had spent his life fighting the land, the droughts, the outlaws, and his own grief. But tonight wasn't about the past. Tonight was about ending it. For good. Behind him, Ilara worked feverishly to douse the spreading flames around the cabin ruins, her hands raw from smoke and heat. Cole, she shouted. They'll be here any minute. You can't hold them alone. Cole didn't answer. He was listening, to the wind, to the distant thunder of hooves rolling over the dry earth. The sound grew louder, closer. They're here, he said, his voice flat, almost calm. Ilara froze. Then we run. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. You still don't understand, do you? If we run, they'll just keep chasing. There's only one way this ends. They stop breathing. Her eyes filled with tears. And if that means you stop too? He gave a faint, grim smile. Then I guess I'll finally get some peace. Alara wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him see that peace didn't have to come with death. But before she could speak, the first shots split the night. Bullets tore through the wooden posts, showering sparks into the firelight. Cole dove for cover, firing back with deadly precision. One outlaw fell from his horse, another cried out, clutching his arm. "Stay down!" Cole barked. Alara crouched behind a trough, clutching a revolver she could barely hold steady. The roar of gunfire echoed through the valley, mingling with the crackle of burning timber. Smoke stung her eyes, but she could still see Cole, a lone figure standing against the blaze, fighting with the strength of 10 men. Every shot he fired was a memory, every pull of the trigger a reckoning. He was no longer just defending land or pride. He was defending the one thing left that mattered, her. As the minutes stretched into an eternity, the outlaws began to close in. There were too many. For every one Cole dropped, 2 more emerged from the darkness. A bullet grazed his side, but he didn't flinch. He grabbed a lantern, hurled it toward a nearby wagon loaded with kerosene, and the explosion lit the night like lightning. Flames roared upward, blinding the riders and scattering their horses in panic. "Cole!" Alara screamed, covering her face from the blast. Through the haze, she saw him standing tall, smoke swirling around him. He looked like a man made of fire and dust, unstoppable, unbreakable, but even iron breaks when it's beaten long enough. A gunshot cracked from the ridge, and Cole staggered backward, hit square in the chest. The world seemed to stop. His rifle slipped from his hand. He dropped to one knee, gasping. "No!" Alara cried, rushing to him. She grabbed his shoulders, tears blurring her vision. "Cole, stay with me, please!" He tried to speak, blood trickling from his lips. "Get behind cover!" he rasped. "I'm not leaving you!" she shouted. The last of the outlaws, rough, wild-eyed men, advanced through the smoke. Alara picked up Cole's rifle, hands trembling, and fired. The first shot missed. The second hit true. The third dropped another rider. She fired again and again until the weapon clicked empty. When the smoke finally cleared, the desert was silent. The outlaws lay scattered among the burning ruins. Their reign of terror ended. Alara dropped the rifle and turned back to Cole. He was lying in the dirt, his breathing shallow, his eyes half closed. She pressed her hands against his wound, sobbing. "Don't you dare die on me." "Not now." He looked at her, his gaze soft and distant. You did it," he whispered. "You're free now," she shook her head furiously. "Not without you," he smiled weakly. "Freedom don't work that way. It ain't about who lives. It's about what you leave behind." Alara's tears fell onto his chest. "Cole, please." But his hand lifted one last time, brushing her cheek. "You were right," he murmured. "Livin'. That's the only way to win." Then his arm fell still. Alara clung to him, her cries drowned by the crackling fire and the whispering wind. When the dawn finally came, it found her sitting beside him, wrapped in the quiet sorrow of survival. The flames had burned out, leaving behind blackened earth and silence. But in that silence, something new stirred, not despair, but purpose. Alara stood slowly, wiping her tears. She buried Cole on the hill overlooking the ranch, beneath the oak tree that had somehow survived the fire. She marked his grave with his hat and rifle, then whispered, "You'll never be forgotten, Cole Maddox. You gave me back my life." As she walked away into the rising sun, her shadow stretched long across the sand. She carried nothing but a small satchel, and the fire he'd left burning in her heart. The land was quiet again, but not dead. It was waiting, healing. And though Cole was gone, his spirit lingered, in the wind, in the dust, in the woman who had learned that freedom was